you want to buy something today that you know for sure will be cheaper in the future. I wouldn't, and that's the exact problem that the SAF industry is facing. Today, SAF is much more expensive than jet fuel, and knowingly it will become cheaper in the future. Nobody knows which technologies and SAF types will become the cheapest though. So no one is willing to do long-term SAF agreements, which are needed to be able to scale it at a large scale. How to create portfolios of different SAF producers and technologies trying to solve that exact problem is something I spoke about today with Arnaud Namer. He's working as the CEO and co-founder at Atoba Energy. He has over 20 years of experience in aviation and energy innovation. Previously, before working on SAF with Atoba Energy, he has worked in aviation hydrogen and on unlocking the hydrogen market for mobility. Now, I'm really grateful that he's joining me today at Impactful Voices to help me solve just another puzzle piece of the big SAF puzzle. You will hear me say that word puzzle probably a lot of times in today's episode, because the more I speak to experts in that field, the more it really appears to me like just a big puzzle to solve. That's why I'm really excited to have this conversation today with Arnaud, and let's delve into it. Hi, Arnaud.
Hi, Leonie. Good seeing you.
Good seeing you too. How are you?
Oh, good. Oh, good. We're excited to have this conversation today and to scale sustainable aviation fuel.
Yes, thank you so much for also scheduling this very early in your day because of our time difference, right?
Yes,
It's, I think,
sure.
one of the first things today on your agenda, right?
Yeah. The time difference makes it always interesting between Europe, the US, and the rest of the world.
Well, thank you still for taking the time and for talking to us about SAF today and demand aggregation and what Atoba Energy is doing on the topic. I think I told you already beforehand in our conversation that for me it's really exciting because I've now talked about the topic SAF with different people that are working on it from different angles. So politics, finance, and now with you. So it's really, for me, a little bit like puzzle piecing, which which I appreciate a lot. So I'm glad that you're contributing a little bit more to my puzzle today. Maybe to start off today, we have already talked about in previous episodes that SAF encounters the challenge of securing early and long-term SAF offtake commitments. Do you want to explain a little bit on that? What are the reasons? Why is that the case?
Yeah, for sure. So it's a little bit what you were mentioning, like a puzzle. You have all sorts of different pieces from a financial, from a policy, from a technology perspective, and you got different stakeholders, and you got to align everything in order to make a project bankable, offtake bankable. So that's what needs to happen. If you look at the problem statement on the long-term offtakes, it's mainly that you have new producers that are with new technologies, first of a kind projects, and generally their development project to construct their production facility is around, let's say, $1 billion. In order to be able to finance these very large projects, they need both debt and equity financing. Mm-hmm. And these financial institutions, they require, I say, a guaranteed return on investment. And in order to have this guaranteed return on investment, they need long-term offtake contracts at a relatively stable price to guarantee the income and the return on investment. And if you look at the other side, on the customer side, the airlines and the customers are looking at this industry as a nascent industry. Nascent from a technology perspective, but also from a scale. So the cost of production is expected to go down over time with evolution of technology, with the scaling of the industry. And so therefore the decrease of the cost with the scaling of the production capabilities. So you find yourself in that dilemma where producers need long-term stability and customers are seeing that the cost should be decreasing over time. So why would they go in a long-term kind of stable long-term contract, offtake contract, when the price is expected to go down over time? And that's why there's a big, I'd say, risk factor for an airline, for example, to go into long-term offtake contracts with a specific producer. One is, which technology should they pick? which feedstocks, what's the risk that that technology actually gets, I'd say, outdated pretty fast because of the evolution of the technologies, and therefore the cost gets too high versus what they could get from the market. So all of these kind of uncertainties need to be stitched together, and there needs to be a central risk management entity that takes into account the potential uncertainties on regulatory issues, on technologies, on feedstocks, and manages that financial part. And typically that's what we do at Atoba Energy.
Okay, so do you want to maybe explain a little bit what you mean with you do? Because you were just talking about all these different uncertainties that have to kind of align for it to finally scale. What exactly, where are you in this whole puzzle, and how are you trying to solve pieces of it?
Yep. So we typically solve, and the core of it is solving that long-term offtake dilemma. Because when you look at the market and we say the market, the cost of production is expected to go down over time. What is the cost of production? It's kind of the weighted average cost of producing SAF in a given region. And the way to guarantee to an airline or an end customer that you can follow kind of that evolution is to create your own portfolio of producers, of long-term offtakes with producers that kind of mimics that behavior and that evolution of the market. So by creating at Atoba portfolios of producers with long-term offtake contracts, you're able to build dynamically a portfolio that evolves with time, a little bit like an ETF in finance, which groups a whole bunch of different, I'd say, pieces in order to have an evolution. That's what we do with our portfolio to guarantee that we bring into the portfolio new producers along the way in order to guarantee that our portfolio behaves at least as good as the overall market. And by doing that, you're able to provide long-term contracts to producers that are relatively stable in time and guarantee that they can pass their financial decisions. And you can guarantee to the end customers a continuously competitive pricing because you build it through that portfolio. So you have long-term offtakes with the airlines, you have long-term offtakes with the producers, and we manage kind of that financial risk management of technologies, feedstocks by doing it through a portfolio approach in the midstream. And just by doing that, you enable the long-term offtakes to the producers. They're able to pass their final investment decisions and therefore get financed and build their factories to scale sustainable fuel. And that's why it's a key central piece of the puzzle of putting all of the pieces together in order to unlock the sustainable aviation fuel.
So what you are doing is basically carrying a bit of the risk on your shoulders, so people are more inclined to actually enter the agreements and purchase the SAF. Is that, could you say that's what you're doing?
It's actually exactly what we're doing, because if you look at the industry without Atoba Energy, the risk is completely pushed either like to the airline or completely pushed to the producer, but it's not stitched together. And by taking part of the risk ourselves, by doing that portfolio management, we're able to stitch together the whole value chain of risks, which is a key differentiator to, like, you have other intermediate marketplaces where they're trying to put together a producer with an airline and to see if it matches, but not taking part of the risk. And when you don't take part of the risk, you're not actually stitching the whole value chain together. You're more like a broker, which is helping a little bit for getting people to talk to each other and to understand each other, but it's not solving that risk layer that you were mentioning, and which is key to be able to, I'd say, give confidence to the industry that the risk is shared throughout different parts of the value chain.
And basically, when you're building that portfolio of different producers, there's also different production technologies that you're having there, that you're covering. One of the risks is, right, that we don't know today which one is going to be the most successful, cheapest one in the future. How do you not personally, but at Atoba, manage that risk for yourself then? Because if down the line you notice you have something in your portfolio that might not perform at all, are you able to remove that again? Because obviously you can't really pass it on to the customers because they have signed a specific price level with you, right? So how does the risk management for you work?
Well, yeah, you have to, as an agnostic aggregator in the middle, the beauty of it is you're able to bring in all types of technology and evolve your portfolio with time. So you do take part of the risk. So like a very large part of our job is to assess all of the projects from all technologies across the world in order to understand the pros, the cons, the risks in terms of the technologies, but also risks in terms of availability of feedstocks, the pricing of the feedstocks, the future pricing of the feedstock. So we do all of these studies to understand the probability of success of each project and the pricing mechanisms that are going to happen in the future. So like any ETF, to take that example again, you're going to have some bad apples and some good apples in the portfolio, and that's exactly what the portfolio is there for, is to be able to absorb, I'd say, the production facilities that are not doing so well, and we're going to of course try to have a minimum of them, but we're going to have also in the portfolio ones that are doing extremely well. And in this weighted average of production of the portfolio, where, I mean, with the expertise that we have in-house, we're able really to go deep with the producers and understand their technologies, and therefore the risk that we're taking has some level in terms of the choice of the producers, but with the due diligence that we do is relatively limited compared to, let's say, outside investors or financial institutions that don't have the level of expertise that we would have. So we consider that the risk is there, but the risk is really mastered by going deep into the due diligence of each individual project and technology.
Okay, that's good. I'm curious to know, because it happened now multiple times, that people I've been talking to on this podcast have made the reference to renewable energy sector. So how aviation maybe has differences or similarities, what we could learn from the sector. Now, a big part of why you're doing your job and why you're doing what you're doing is because there's so many technologies and we don't know exactly yet which one's gonna be the one or how many there are gonna be. Did we have a similar problem in renewable energy? How was it solved there? Or is it really because there's like wind, solar, and that's it, you know? And for SAF, it's just so much broader, so much more complex. Can you make a comparison there?
I think there's it's a good, so you have to take, as you said, you have to take the similarities, but there are significant differences because the feedstock, I'd say in the renewable energy, you have two feedstocks, you have the sun and the wind. In the sustainable aviation fuel world, you have more like, which are in the renewable energy kind of unlimited feedstocks, whereas on the sustainable aviation fuel side, you have a lot more variety of feedstock. You have some scarcity in terms of feedstock, like on the HEFA pathway, which is in production today. It's mainly used cooking oils, animal fats, tallows, and which have limited availability. And so we're going to need to transfer to other technologies, which are either biosaf or power to liquids, each having their specificities and challenges. And so I think the complexity is a little bit higher in the sustainable aviation fuel, especially that, like when you look at the solar energy and solar panels, it's kind of a given technology and mass production that decreases the cost. When you look at SAF facility, it's huge factories with different bits and pieces in order to transform chemically the feedstock into the fuel. And so the scaling of the industry is going to be also more complex in terms of getting the cost down. So we have to take into account the lessons learned, but also really that there are differences. One of the real similarities is on the book and claim kind of capabilities. On the book and claim capabilities, you do have the ability to dissociate, I would say, the production of the energy, whether that's renewable energy or SAF, to the end user in terms of physical delivery of the product to the end user. And that's something that we need to take from the renewable energy and really deploy massively in the SAF in order to make it simpler to get access to SAF. But if we don't have that, we have the whole physical molecule of SAF to deliver, which is also, I'd say, an added complexity in the system of sustainable aviation fuel.
Good jump onto book and claim, because I'm also curious to understand, I mean, the system itself is already really complicated with if you trying to source SAF in a specific airport where maybe it's not available. So we've talked about book and claim on here in the past a little bit as part of the solution of the infrastructure problem. But now for you, what you're doing is having this portfolio of different producers, maybe different technologies, different types of SAF. How does the end consumer access this blend of massive different technologies and SAFs? How do you make use of book and claim as well?
Yes, so it's important. So we have both capabilities, both book and claim and physical fuel delivery, depending on what we're looking at. Like in mandated markets, like in Europe, where in order to respond to the market, it has to be physical fuel delivery. We have the capability to do that. So we don't do the physical delivery ourselves. We partner with logistics, distribution, and blenders to be able to do that. And therefore, it's often a three-party agreement between an airline, from a customer perspective, an airline, a blender distributor, and us, and then it's our job to make sure we provide the blender distributor with the fuel. We already do kind of a dissociation, because we dissociate the financial aspects, so the pricing aspects, to the physical fuel, because of course we're not going to deliver to airlines like molecules coming from every production facility in order to represent our portfolio. We're going to make the delivery to the airline as simple as possible from the production location, which is in our portfolio, as close as possible to the airport that they're operating from. And it's from a financial perspective that we do this aggregation, not from a molecule perspective. And in areas of the world where there's no mandate, it's on the voluntary basis, then we do the exact same approach on the book and claim side for voluntary, except that we don't have to deal with the physical fuel delivery, because the fuel, or the sustainable aviation fuel from a molecule perspective, is used or sold as similar to jet fuel, and therefore we dissociate the scope 1 and the scope 3 environmental attributes in order to provide that to the end customer.
Okay, so it really depends on the context, isn't
Yes.
what I'm getting from this. Okay, so basically, correct me if I'm wrong, but what you're doing with these portfolios is you're setting a specific price, regardless of how the different SAF technologies develop and evolve further down the line. But didn't you also say in the beginning that why people might be hesitant to sign offtake agreements today is because maybe in 5 or 10 years they're cheaper? So they obviously would want to sign them there. Wouldn't that be still a similar principle with going through you, like through a portfolio? Because wouldn't they also, in 5 or 10 years, on average, the price index that you're setting become cheaper? Or how are you bouncing off that risk of people wanting to wait?
Well, so the price index, just to make sure we're clear, the price index is, we're not setting the price in 2035 or 2040. It's that index that's going to price it, and that index is independent of us. What's important is when we price to an airline to that index, we can't hold the index, otherwise there's a conflict of interest. So that index is held by an independent third party, which is the usual people that are specialized in making indices, benchmarks, and things like that. And they assess the entire market in a given region. And so what we guarantee is that, like in 2035 or 2040, they're going to assess the entire cost of production plus margin in a given region. And they're going to say the value today is of this number. And so the risk that we're managing in the portfolio management is to ensure that our portfolio is at least as good as that index. So if the prices decrease significantly over time, that index, it will show in the index that we guarantee to the airline. And it's our continuous job to make sure that we have these producers in our portfolio in order to be able to meet that index.
Okay, so basically, thank you for explaining, because that means that you're really countering that effect of, we're signing something today, but in 10 years at a time, it might be so much cheaper, because you're always guaranteeing to stick with whatever future developments.
Yes. Exactly.
Okay.
And that's how we manage the portfolio dynamically. Like every new project that's going to come out, every new technology that's going to come out, we're going to assess and see if we bring it in the portfolio in order to make the portfolio evolve over time and still be as good as or better than that overall index.
Okay, understood. Sounds good. Too good to be true. We also talked about looking into complementary mechanisms. I'm not an expert on, so I'd be grateful for you to explain them to me. Something like double-sided auctions, what would they do? How would they complement it? Or what problem could they additionally help solving? How do they work?
Yeah, so they work a little bit differently because it's mainly a way to. So the mechanism, whether it's the double sided auction, whether it's the revenue certainty mechanism in the UK, the objective is to kind of compensate or the gap between jet fuel and sustainable aviation fuel through subsidies and find mechanisms to be able to apply subsidies either by, I'd say, government subsidies and finding a way to take the best producer at a given time and the best and the highest willingness to pay of an airline at a given time and to subsidize the difference of cost between the two. So it's there are more mechanisms to apply subsidies than I'd say market makers. So like we are. So they're very complementary because we're independent of the subsidies. So our mechanisms works whether there's subsidies or no subsidies, because it enables the continuous competitiveness. And so if you layer on top subsidies on top of our aggregation platform, then enables that index more or less to be closer to the jet fuel and reduce the gap for the I'd say the SAF premium. So they're very complementary in the approaches. Ours is more like a long term, because what we see in the cycle of sustainable aviation fuel is that a cycle for a new technology to arrive in SAF production between the research, the first pilot project, and then the commercial project is roughly 10 years. And in order to get to I'd say cost of production that starts to stabilize and we start to reach maturity in terms of technology, we estimate that there's going to be at least 3 or 4 cycles. So we're talking about 30, 40 years of evolutions of technologies and cost reduction in the sustainable aviation fuel side. And our portfolio management enables exactly that long-term strategy to a convergence where the SAF market is very liquid. The mechanisms that we're talking about, subsidies, they're generally more for first of a kind production in order to launch the first projects, the first power to liquid projects. And so that's why there's also a handoff in terms of this complementarity in terms of model, but there's also a handoff that gradually these mechanisms won't be needed anymore and let the market evolve naturally.
Okay, maybe maybe a weird question, but I know that today SAF is one of the most promising levers that we have to decarbonize the industry right now and as quick as possible, because a lot of we're not gonna have electric commercial long haul flights anytime soon, and then on top of that from sustainable energy, renewable energy, so right. But what just struck with me when you're saying that sometimes like these cycles is like 30, 40 years until maybe it's like as price efficient as it can get. Is there a conflict, or are you thinking about how maybe in 30, 40 years other technologies of decarbonizing aviation might either come in the way of SAF or go with SAF? Or is that a concern or a thought that you're having?
Yeah, I think so. We need to, like when we talk about aviation, you often have the right technology for the right application. And as you mentioned, like for long haul flights, sustainable aviation fuel is going to be there for the long term, for that 30, 40 years, especially that the life span of an aircraft is around 20 to 30 years. So in order for the whole I'd say aircraft fleet that's flying across the world to be changed to a radically new technology, we're talking about at least 50 to 100 years before you get the technology mature, get it to scale, replace all of the existing aircraft. And the more you wait for that, the more you have to produce existing technology aircraft. So that the time frame to change a global fleet is enormous in the world. So sustainable aviation fuel is surely going to be there for the long haul, for the medium haul. On the other spectrum, battery electric today is for very small, like eVTOL environment, for very small 50 miles to 100 miles commute. With the evolution of batteries, it may evolve a little bit. Then you have a segment which is roughly between that 100-mile and and I'd say 1,000 nautical miles is a short range, which could be done by hydrogen, but it has its whole other sets of infrastructure issues, more from an infrastructure than from a technology perspective. That's a little bit the background. So before Atoba Energy, I was in that space of of hydrogen aviation, and technology-wise, from an aircraft perspective, it's very promising. But you have to build a whole infrastructure on the ground to be able to distribute that decarbonized hydrogen. And so there is a place for hydrogen aviation in that I'd say short haul. But so it's going to be a complementary, but the sustainable aviation fuel, the need for sustainable aviation fuel is going to stay in terms of large quantities for, I'd say, a good 50 to 100 years because of that time frame to be able to change the technologies and evolve in time.
Yeah, wow, that's when you just said 50 to 100 years, I was like, oh, that's really long if you think about 100 years. But yeah, I mean, that definitely doesn't make SAF an interim solution anymore by
Oh, for
far.
sure. For sure,
Yeah.
because yeah, as I said, maybe in 100 years, you're not going to have a huge amount of planes that are going to fly on SAF, but you're still going to have airplanes that are going to transition gradually out, and so it's going to be a long term need for sure.
Okay, that's good to know because I guess that's also at least taking away one of what we're seeing on a small scale, like not the investment going into different technologies of SAF because people are scared it's not going to be the most successful one. I mean, if you would have that with SAF in general, that would make the bigger picture even worse if people would think, oh, maybe in 20 years we don't even need SAF anymore. So that's good to know that we will need SAF even in 100 years.
I think the
Do you?
main blocker for SAF, I say the main barrier is really the pricing today, because the cheapest SAF. So if we take the jet fuel prior to the Iran war, the sustainable aviation fuel at the cheapest is 2 to 3 times more than jet fuel, and at the most expensive is 8 to 10 times, depending on the technologies. And so that's a huge, I'd say, barrier to these long-term offtakes, because even if the industry knows it has to go in that direction, even if there's the capability to produce them, nobody's willing and wants to pay twice the price when you know that the airline industry is a very thin margin industry. How to create mechanisms where you don't penalize significantly the airlines, and how do you not, I would say, bankrupt them by forcing very expensive fuels. And that's kind of the reasons why it's having a difficulty to scale.
Yeah. It's very interesting because what you're just saying is, I think, especially when you're not really deep into the topic and the industry, like you're saying, you think, oh, there's mandates. So politically, there has to be SAF at a certain point, at a certain level. So there is guarantee that it's going to be needed. So why don't people invest? Because isn't that clear? But then, yeah, it's like I said, this whole puzzle is really been following me around for a few months now, and it doesn't stop. But I think that's also what makes it so exciting to probably work at it on the topic, is because it's a puzzle and it doesn't solve that quickly, which is a shame because we need quick solutions. But also, I guess it's always nice to have a lot of room for innovation and coming up with new ideas to facilitate transactions, literally like you are doing with the aggregation.
Yes, for sure. So it's a puzzle, and as you said, even with the mandates, the mandate has solved kind of the need for volumes of sustainable aviation fuel, but there's still that significant risk management and pricing, like risk from a technology selection and risk from a pricing that's still there, is existing. Like, for example, if you take Europe, it's existing within Europe, but it's also existing between like countries that or areas that have mandates and areas that don't have mandate, and therefore creating some kind of distortion of from the airline's perspective in terms of the overall routes across the world. So there's still a lot of like uncertainty, and we're starting to be in the concrete where final investment decisions of production plants need to happen this year in order to enable the 2030 objectives in terms of different types of sustainable aviation fuel. And then we're starting to see that because we're really in front of that decision, we're starting to see pushbacks from some of the airline industry, because there's some uncertainty, risk management, and that's not clear yet. So it's still a lot of moving pieces that need to be solved in order to make it happen in the smoothest way possible.
Yeah, I've heard that 2026 now also multiple times, that it's a very crucial year in the SAF industry. So fingers crossed. Now, I like to ask this everyone that's talking to me on here, just because it's also just nice to hear from people that are working on the ground on those issues, how you're staying optimistic and motivated. So basically, when you just mentioned that, wow, there's a few projects that we know that have to get through to FID this year or we won't reach the targets. How is your feeling about that? How optimistic are you? How motivated are you on that topic?
So I mean, very optimistic and motivated. I mean, the complexity of the system is what's making it really interesting. Because as I always say, the more complex the environment, the more room there is for innovation, finding ways to solve the problems and things like that. So I think that it's an environment in which there's a lot of, I'd say, openness in terms of finding solutions. Afterwards, you do have global geopolitical situations that make the focus decrease, like since the start of the Iran war or the last year, the focus has been much more on, I'd say, the short term for the airline. Like right now, it's do I have fuel to be able to operate my airline? And sustainability has gone down to a very low priority for the airlines because they're just in kind of survival mode into making sure they're going to be able to operate. They have security of fuel and things like that. So progressing quickly as we need to on the SAF side hinders that geopolitical situation, hinders significantly the capability. A lot of the focus has shifted in the last year and a half from sustainability to defense. And so and a lot of the funds have moved from sustainability to defense. AI has always been there and has always, I'd say, taken a lot of the financing focus and all of that. But there was AI and sustainability, and it's moved to AI and defense, which is not helping us industry move as fast as what we you have to do what with the situation as it is, and there is still a significant focus in finding out. And the good thing is that there's different technologies of SAF, but I'd say the fact that SAF is needed to scale significantly for aviation to still continue to grow is unanimous. There's no question about it. It's just a question of how to make it happen. And that's why it's still an optimistic area, because it has to happen, and we just have to be clever in terms of how to make it happen.
Now, because you delved into it real quickly, the geopolitical situation, and then you were saying that's kind of not helping, it's hindering the development. But isn't there also a lot of talks now and concerns about energy security? Isn't that, even though in general it's not good, but could that be helping, having a push towards, we actually need to scale SAF because we don't want to be dependent on fossil fuels that much anymore, because we can see how much that can interrupt a whole industry or a whole planet somehow. Do you think there's also opportunities arising from that in that direction?
Yes, for sure. It brings that topic a lot more front of the stage in terms of energy sovereignty. The question is a momentary crisis of, I don't know how long it's going to last, but is a momentary crisis going to be sufficient to justify the need to invest billions in an industry that is significantly more expensive today in terms of availability of the cost of the fuel? That's something that each state is going to assess in terms of the pros and cons, depending on the availability of energy and the types of energy they have in their country. But it's definitely, I'd say, one of the counterparts is putting some more focus on getting the governments involved in defining the strategy for energy sovereignty and seeing if that's a path to scale the industry, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, it's always good to try to find something good and something bad, because that maybe helps us keep going. And we're actually also, you're going to be part of the Impact Forum end of next month, end of May in London. And we're also going to now integrate that because of the timely manner of the energy resilience aspect. We're going to integrate that in our forum as well and talk about this. So I think it's great to pick that back up then.
Sure.
Overall, thank you so much. I think I've learned a lot again for my puzzle that I'm piecing together for a few months now. Thank you for helping me with that. And yeah, everyone that listened and has any questions for Arnaud, you can send them to us. You can probably Also reach out to Arnaud on LinkedIn directly, I assume. Yeah, and then I wish you a very pleasant day. I'm gonna be ending my day soon, but I hope you have a sunny day still ahead of you.
Thank you very much, Leonie. It was a pleasure speaking to you, and I can't wait to see you at the event at the end of next month. And thank you very much for the great discussion.
Thank you. See
Thank you. Bye
you.
bye.
Bye bye.